Hello everybody, welcome to the Coaching Conversation. I'm Graham Wiley and I've been coaching business leaders for the last 2 decades. In this series we're going to explore some of the things I've seen and learned in that 2 decades and hopefully help you see how you can become more focused, more effective and hopefully happier in your life. So it's now time to sit back, relax and enjoy the Coaching Conversation. Hello everybody and welcome to this edition of the Coaching Conversation. As you know, our goal in all of this series is to provide you with insights and tips to help you be the person you'd rather be and help you do the things and achieve the things you'd like to achieve, just like any coaching conversation. Today's edition is going to be a bit more supercharged than that because I've got a special guest. We're very privileged to have Ernie-Sander with us, who is absolutely an expert in communications. And that's a bit like saying Coca-Cola is a pretty popular fizzy drink. It's a ridiculous understatement. Ernie, thanks for joining us. Could I just ask you to talk us through your background by way of introduction, who you are, where you've come from, and the work you're doing now?
Of course, Graham, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you. That was an amazing introduction. I'll probably never get another one like that again. I'll have to save that recording. I have a media background. So I was in the media business for 25 years at a combination of bigger legacy media, places like the Wall Street Journal, and then digital media startups. And in an editorial kind of management capacity, launching sections of the paper, managing teams of reporters around coverage areas, doing long form stuff, short form stuff, all different kinds of formats, newsletters, video, stories, text, audio. At the first part of my career, I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about how to tell really good stories. At the Wall Street Journal, we would, as Rupert Murdoch used to mention when he bought News Corp, when he bought the Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones, that every story had 7.2 editors touching it before it got to readers. And so there was a lot of sort of strategizing and brainstorming. And I, as inefficient as it may have been, I really enjoyed it and really learned a lot about how to tell good stories. We had this feeling that people who were reading the Wall Street Journal, it was not their first read. And so they were reading their hometown newspaper as well. And so we had to be telling them stories that they weren't getting from their hometown newspaper. So we'd spend a lot of time thinking about how can we make our stuff different? And if they already know it, let's not tell that story. Let's tell a different story. So that was really valuable experience for me. And then in the sort of second part of my media career, I was at startups. And of course, you're still telling stories, but there's so much more that's important with content in a digital realm beyond how good the stories are. You have to really think about how they get to audiences and how you create engagement. And of course, that involves the way you distribute them and the kinds of partnerships you have and whether they're search optimized and what you do on social and all of that kind of stuff. And so spent a lot of time on those pursuits kind of in the second part of my career. So now about a couple of years ago, I joined a really interesting startup communications agency called Pioneer Collective. And we work with leaders of all kinds, a lot of senior executives, but also coaches and authors to help kind of expand their influence and accelerate their impact. We do that through thought leadership, through coaching, through networking. And I use a lot of the storytelling tricks and the how to build engagement tricks as I kind of work with them to increase their footprint. You know, a lot of them have lots of wisdom and experience, and but because they're so busy doing their jobs, or because they're not really focused on, they don't sit around thinking, how can I amplify what wisdom I have? They don't really have the impact that they could be having, and so we help them kind of connect what they have done and what they know to kind of bigger audiences.
One of the stat lines I read about you is that you're a seasoned pro who helps others shape their ideas and build their reputation, which is a fabulous sense of purpose. Well, every one of us listening or watching this is going to want a bit of that, please. So that's a tremendous skill set.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm fortunate to work with really interesting and dynamic people. And I think what I try to do is sort of tease that out and make sure that, again, that gets amplified. I'm not there to make them something different than they are. I'm there to tease out what's special about them. And I think I love doing that. And I think, as you say, I think when you can do that successfully, there's a real sense of accomplishment on both sides. But it's for the leaders, it really feels like they kind of suddenly they whatever they want to do, whatever they want to say, it feels like they're speaking with a bigger megaphone. So it's a cool thing to see.
Yeah, and anything that helps overcome challenges like imposter syndrome and lack of public speaking confidence, and anything that does that is worth its weight in gold, isn't it? If you're a business leader, you really want to be capable in those areas. And I'm aware that one of the tools that you use is about storytelling. Could you perhaps position that for us and perhaps even give us an example of what you do?
Yeah. It's, as you know, as well as anybody, to be a successful leader, you really have to connect with people. And so we sort of know instinctively that it's important to connect with people, but the devil's in the details, and it's a lot harder to do than people think. And there's people who do it really well, and there's people who do it less well. And ultimately what you're trying to do is to get people to really believe in what you're doing. And so I think too often, if you're the boss, you manage these people. And so I can come in and I can tell the people that work for me, we're going to, grow sales 5 times, or I want you to strike a partnership with this person this way, or, whatever you set your goals being, or you can just announce to them if they ask you, I'm a really ethical person, or I'm a really charismatic person, or whatever you want them to think about you. But just making statements like that isn't really convincing and doesn't really create buy-in. And so you need to figure out how to create faith in what you're pursuing. And so this is where stories come in, and it's this whole idea of sort of push and pull, where if I'm the boss, I can just push somebody to do something, but what you want to do is create a pull around your ideas and who you are, and so that you can achieve what you want to achieve. And that's where we use storytelling.
Now, management is exercised through authority, but leadership comes through persuading people to want to do what you want them to do.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate goal, isn't it? You want people to really buy into your vision and your ambition as a leader.
Yeah, and I think we all can think about people that we've worked for and who we really connected with, and who we'd go into battle for, and there was just kind of a boss that we listened to because they were paying us. And I think for me, often the difference is that I did buy in on a deeper level with the people that I really would go to battle with, and I understood at a deeper level kind of what made them tick, but also why we were doing what we were doing. It didn't just feel like a bunch of goals on a whiteboard. It felt like there was some rationale to it, and because of that, I was all in. And so I think that's important to try to create that. It's harder to do than to just to order people around, but I think it pays dividends if you pay attention to it. The other thing I would just say quickly is that I think that we forget that people are kind of inherently skeptical, I think. And so they're kind of, if you say something, they're quickly saying why or how or what to themselves. And so the burden is on you to kind of convince them at a deeper level that what you're saying is right or truthful or makes sense or whatever. And so I think that's where storytelling comes in. It's like that just leaves a deeper impression on people. It becomes in the absence of it, Graham, if I spent 5 years with you and we went to the pub and we took trips together and I would know that you're a great guy, and I know that you're ethical, and I know that you're successful, and I know that you're somebody that I should follow. But if you're my boss tomorrow and you tell me these things about yourself. Like I don't have any reference point, I don't have any context. And so stories help create those little bits of context for people to say like, oh, I get Graham, I understand him now. This gives me a window into his soul. And so I think that they're important for that reason.
I think that's really true. It's also the social dimension, isn't it? You know, the more people know each other and understand each other, the greater the cooperation and support is going to, the mutual support is going to be. One of the tools you use, I believe, is called the 5 stories that every executive should be able to tell about themselves. I'm really curious about this. I can't think of 5 I want to tell anybody about. So perhaps you could share it with us and talk us through how it works.
I should just preface this by saying, look, 5 is the number that I've come up with, but if you can do 3 or 2, or you're moving the needle in the right direction. And so I think it's really about just starting to get into that zone of developing stories that you can tell to illustrate points. And again, if you take baby steps and get to 1 and 2 and 3, I pick 5, but there's no magic number around 5. But the goal with all of them is to give more of a, to me, the big questions to answer with these stories are kind of, who am I? You know, why am I here? And where am I going? And so these stories I think help in different ways to kind of get to those questions, which I think are the way that you create connections with people. And I should also just say that the stories don't, you know, people are, as we talked about, it's easier to summon facts or just to make statements, and people feel uncomfortable, totally understandably, talking about their life. They're worried that it's going to come off sounding weird, or that it's going to be too self-referential, or that they're going to sound like they're a loser if it's a story about failure. And so there's a lot of inhibition to sharing personal stories. And I do think people should get comfortable sharing some personal stories, but all the stories don't have to be personal. They can be a story about your aunt, or a story about Mother Teresa, or a story about Winston Churchill, or you can do stories about other people that are important to you. And by the slice of that story that you capture, you give a window onto what you think is important and what resonates with you. And thus, you know, you're helping create connections with other people. So it doesn't all have to be, you don't have to mine your life and think about, okay, what's the most important story from when I was 10 to 15? What's the most important stories in my when I was 25? I mean, again, I think that's a good exercise to do. So does that make sense? And I'll jump into the stories.
It does. I can completely understand why it opens people up, and particularly people who don't know each other but very well to begin with. And that could be just because of the size of the organization, not just because of the length of service. I can absolutely buy into all of that. And so when you're working with the client and you're introducing this concept, how does it roll out? What do you get them to do?
Well, I usually start, we work backwards a little bit, and we start to try to find out, you know, what they want to say. You work from these statements back into the stories that can illustrate it. So the first story that I say that people should be able to tell is there a time when you overcame a challenge and how it changed you? And so it could be you know, maybe it was a tough work relationship, or maybe it was a stretch goal, or a new job or assignment. I talk about when I was in high school, I was playing football, this American football, and I broke my neck, and I was in a halo cast in this traction for 3 months, and I had to cut up all my shirts so that I could wear the same shirts. And I was out of school for a while, and then when I went back to school, obviously I was wearing this contraption, and everybody thought it was funny. And I had friends, so I wasn't. I'm making it sound a little worse than it was, but people would laugh at it. And for a while, and I was really into athletics, and I couldn't play sports for a while, and so for about 9 months or so, I was a sort of different person, and it gave me a lot of time to really think about what was important in my life. I spent a lot more time studying. I spent a lot more time with kind of fewer friends. I was much more appreciative of my family, who was really there for me. And so it's a bit of a story about resilience, but it's a bit of a story about growing up as well. And so I think everybody has those. The challenges can be from any period in your life. So the first one I talk about is, talk about a challenge and how it shaped you. Again, ideally, it shaped you in a way that's still important to you, right? So there's some longevity to the story that you're telling. I also talk about a time when I lived in Japan in my 20s in a little town, and I spoke a tiny bit of Japanese and nobody spoke English there. And so I use that story as a time when I made a lot of mistakes with the language, with the culture, but it helped shape me. And I have a lot of really long-term relationships that came out of that time in this little town of 15,000. And so I have stories like that I use, but they can come from any different setting. So that's the first story that I tell. The second story that I ask people to kind of think about in their lives is, what about a time when you failed and you didn't overcome it? So the first one is kind of like happy ending, but there was a journey in which I learned something. The second is, I'm used to succeeding. I didn't. How did that change me? What did that feel like? And I talk about, I'll throw it, I'll try to make these quick, my own stories, but just trying to give examples of the kinds of things that people can use. I lived in Hong Kong also for a little bit of time, and I moved back to the US. That's when I worked at the Wall Street Journal, and I worked on their Asian publication in Hong Kong. And then I moved back to the US, and I joined a new section and helped launch a new section. And I had new bosses and new colleagues, and I was trying to impress everybody, and I was trying to make everything perfect. And I started spending too long on things, and I was blowing deadlines, and it over time, I realized that, the goal that the section was set up in a more collaborative environment. People would spend a lot of time sitting around talking about story ideas and writing headlines together. And I was so focused on trying to do this perfect set of work myself that I wasn't integrating with the group. And I was messing up other things in the process. And once I realized that it's not about perfection, it's about, you need to do something kind of quickly, and you need to do it pretty well. You need to get something 90% of the way there yourself, but it's all about tapping into the power of the group, and collaborating. And that's what made this section really successful. Once I sort of saw that, I was able to get better, but there was a period where I didn't see it, and I felt like I was really failing, and I was missing things, and I felt like I couldn't do what was needed, what was expected of me. And so that's an example that I gave for that. The third prompt is to talk about why I chose the career that I chose. And this is sort of about, if you're a healthcare executive, why are you in healthcare? Where does your passion come from? Where does your energy come from? Why are you committed to it? What's to make me think you won't just go to the energy industry tomorrow, or become a CFO in the banking world? Like what makes you attached to what healthcare is all about? For example, if you're in that industry. And I have a story that I talk about there as well. So I think that's really important. And then the fourth prompt is, tell me a little bit about kind of your future vision for yourself. And again, with some of the leaders that we work with, I'll use healthcare again. We work with kind of healthcare tech leaders. And, I think my sense is that the UK healthcare system is more together and works better, but our healthcare system's massively fragmented. And so one of the challenges is that you see all these different specialists, and all of your different records and data are all over the place, and there's nobody who's kind of minding the store. And so a lot of the leaders who are in digital health talk about a future in which that becomes more integrated, and everything is unified on a platform where all your specialists can see what's going on. You can have access to your health data. You can share it with whoever you want. You don't have to fill out new forms, 10-page forms every doctor you go see. And they talk about, for example, they tell stories about family members that have fallen through the cracks, that have passed away because the healthcare was so fragmented that they were seeing 8 different doctors, but none of the doctors were talking to each other, and they missed a cancer diagnosis, for example. Or they'll talk about a story when they were growing up, and this is many years ago, because the world has moved on since then. But when we had these family doctors who were the point people for us and who kind of knew everything about us, we came in, they knew about our lives. They ordered up all the tests that got done around us, and so they were those people that were ultimately responsible for our care. Now that care is so spread out. So they'll tell stories like that, either something that didn't work out and why, or something that they thought worked out really well, and kind of trying to evoke a vision of how we can get back to that. So that's the fourth prompt. And then the fifth prompt that I think is important is to make sure. So all the stories that I've told so far are really individual stories, but it's important to tell a group story of some kind too, where the leader or the executive obviously has a role in that group setting, but where you can see what that looks like when they're in a larger setting. And so, for example, we work with a sales leader who during COVID was, he's being a sales guy, he's used to being out and about and gets a lot of energy from meeting with people and in-person stuff. And he was frustrated at the inability, as a lot of people I think were, to be able to do those things. And so they were able to do a few things here and there. And he wrote a piece on LinkedIn about a volunteer effort where they got a bunch of people together in Florida, and they did a trash cleanup in mangrove swamp, and just how important those in-person experiences are for him, how he learns things about people, he learns things about the business that he wouldn't get on a Zoom meeting, and how there's a social component to it after, where people go out for drinks or for a meal. And he shared photos of this experience, of this cleanup effort in Florida. And it was just a really nice way, instead of saying, I miss in-person meetings, which is kind of a generic statement that I think is true, but not very captivating. He wrote a story about a volunteer effort, about the conversations he had with these people. He shared a photo. It was much more evocative the way he did it. But it was all in the service of making this broader point about how he really can't wait to get back to where he believes that virtual of course has a role in our future. And we've learned a lot about the power of virtual, but he really felt like we've swung way too far, and he hopes we don't ever go that far again in terms of the move to virtual at the expense of in person. And so I thought it was a powerful way to make that point. Sorry, I've been talking for 15 minutes.
No, I can see how you collaborate. You put all of those 5 different stories together so that they have in their kit bag each of those stories for an appropriate moment with an appropriate audience. Absolutely, I can see how that massively enhances the quality of the relationship they're going to build with that group of people, that individual even. And it's about making themselves vulnerable, and it's about making themselves authentic, opening themselves up, taking a bit of a risk, and being seen to do that, being seen to share. Now, clearly they can control what they say, but it's a way of allowing people into your mind and into your thoughts and emotions without it becoming intrusive, or you becoming overbearing and enforcing it on people. So I can see that the storytelling as a form of training for a leader, for a business executive, is really helpful. I can see that if you get their mind thinking this way, they won't just have 5 stories. They'll think about it whenever they're posed with a challenge. They'll think about it however they want to engage with people and motivate them to want to think the way they want them to be thinking. And again, we're talking about being on the emotional channel, not just the data channel, not just transmitting information and instruction. We're conveying it in a way that says, and this is why it matters, and this is why I care about it, and why I want you to care about it. And I think it's a tremendous tool. I can see how eye-opening for many of my coaching clients that kind of equipment would be. I can see how they would absolutely warm to it, because many of the coaching clients I have real problems with engagement, either because of imposter syndrome or because of fear of public speaking, and so on and so on. And so they do tend to be very reticent or very starchy, and they concentrate on the facts and not the emotion, not the why, just the what.
Yeah, and I think there's ways to take, as I said, sort of baby steps into this. I think, there's some people who are really comfortable with public speaking, and obviously that's really powerful when you see someone who's a great public speaker. Some people are more comfortable writing, and they can write, emails that have some of this stuff. And I think that can also be great too. I think that it's also, you can turn these stories into really layered, not necessarily lengthy, but lots of twists and turns and kind of exciting. Or you can also turn these stories into something that doesn't quite have, it's not a Hollywood script, but it has elements of this. And I think you still get some of the bang for the buck if you start to wade into this and just start to open yourself up, just start to tell little anecdotes. If it's a 15-second anecdote, it doesn't need to be a 5-minute, 15-minute on the edge of your seat kind of story, as great as those are. But I think we all see, I think I speak for myself, when you're in a setting and somebody kind of launches into a story, I think there's a part of you, I just kind of naturally lean into that a little bit. And I sort of like take a deep breath and I feel like, okay, this is going to be, there's going to be something here to remember. And I think I'm mindful of the fact that, there's a lot of people that there's only so many personality traits. And there's a lot of people that are going to claim that if somebody says to me, diversity is important to me, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of people for whom diversity is really important for. And so if somebody writes a story and they just tell me 100 times that diversity is important to them, I'm probably not going to remember it. But if they tell me a story about why diversity is important to them or when it was important to them, I'm probably going to remember that. And if it's a better story, I'm really going to remember it. And so the stories, the other important piece of the stories is that it's really one of the only differentiators that we have, or I should say one of the key differentiators that we have, to just make these, to just say, to announce that you have certain attributes. You're one of millions of people that claim to have those attributes or that truly have those attributes, but your stories are truly original. And I see that all the time with the leaders that we work with. When you start working with stories, even if they're not these spellbinding stories, their story is different than anybody else's story around that same thing. There's no way the facts can be exactly the same. And so if there's a certain amount of detail and a certain amount of color, it's their story and it's theirs only. And I think it has to resonate with people because it's unique.
And I think in the example you gave of diversity, just telling people that you value diversity, it is just a very thin veneer. If you say, I value diversity and this is what I'm doing about it in my organization, or these are the experiences I've had around diversity that make me think this way, suddenly you're credible, suddenly you're believable, suddenly people want to help you with whatever that, in this context, diversity subject is. So I can see that.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time, Ernie, your time, our time, and our audience's time. I'm really grateful for you coming and joining us today. I'm really, really pleased, and thank you very, very much. If any of our audience want to reach out to you, how could they find you?
A couple different ways. I'm at, as you mentioned, I'm at Pioneering Collective. So pioneeringcollective.com is our communications agency, and you can reach me through there. You can also reach me at the email address there, which is e-sander, S-A-N-D-E-R, at pioneeringcollective.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Ernie Sander, and Twitter and Facebook and other places that people might look. Really look forward to hearing from your audience. If they have questions, they want to know about storytelling, they want to know more about our agency, anything. I'm totally open for questions. Love connecting with listeners. So that would be great.
I also need to recommend your podcast. You Said What? So a fantastic title for a podcast. So there we are, everybody. Thanks very much. This is the end of this edition of the Coaching Conversation. And thanks very much, Ernie. And goodbye, everybody. Bye. So there you have it, the latest edition of the Coaching Conversation. Hope you found it interesting. Hope you found it useful. You can find out more about our coaching programs at theexecutivemindset.co.uk. If you want to reach out, you can send me an email at theexecutivemindset@sagegreen.com. You can book a free 30-minute session at theexecutivemindset.co.uk, which will give you a really good feel for how coaching could help you. And if you've really enjoyed the session, do please rate us, do please give us a review. And nothing more for me to say other than see you next time.